Good, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you to Jeff and to Haruko, who's not with us today, for inviting me back. Always a great pleasure. And especially to appear in this important year, 400th anniversary of his death, the great man's death. And there have been lots of interesting celebrations. Now, today we have one of Shakespeare's strangest plays, a very odd play. Some people love, some people hate. As usual, can I just ask you a question? How many people have seen Merry Wives of Windsor on stage? Maybe one, maybe half. 1, 2, 2. And so presumably nobody has acted in it, I presume. Yeah. Many people have not even read it. It's a play that it has wonderful Shakespearean themes, such as jealousy, love, deceit, trickery, status problems, arranged marriages, all that kind of stuff. So it sounds a bit like Othello, but in fact it's a total comedy. It's a little bit of a mystery, actually, this play, why it was written, so I'll tell you a bit about that, and then I'd like to look at a lot of trivia points. Jeff's very worried because this program I produced is so long, he thinks it'll be 2 hours. Don't worry, I'm not going to read everything. And we'll also talk a little bit about the BBC production we're seeing today. Now, one special thing about this play is it's all about this, and here I brought again my second house. Although actually this is a Tudor house, so it's really where Jeff lives. And why this is important is this play is all about Shakespeare's England. It's the only play set entirely in England of his time. And not only that, it's about the middle class. It's about bourgeois society. Very unusual. And this makes it extremely interesting to social historians because we learn so much about clothes, the food, the way people spoke, how they thought about each other, things like that, if you study the play. We also have 2 aristocratic figures appear in the shape of the famous Falstaff and Fenton, who are both aristocrats but have no money, have wasted all their money. Then we have a big middle-class bunch, and then we also have the low class represented by Falstaff's followers, Bardolph and Nym. So we have a complete range, but we don't have any kings, we don't have any queens, we don't have any battles, we don't have any blood. And we have a happy ending, so it's going to be a lovely treat today. Now, I think we should go straight to the 20 questions here I've produced, and I'll base my talk on those. So number 1, you may know the answers to some of these, but I hope you don't know the answers to all of them. Was it first performed on April the 23rd, 1597, and how old was Shakespeare? Well, I'm sure you all know how old Shakespeare was. He was 33. It was his birthday, April the 23rd. Now that actually has nothing to do with it. Why April the 23rd? Because it's St. George's Day, the patron saint of England. And it's thought that it was produced first on that day. Nobody actually knows when he wrote it. If you look at the, here on the front we have the chronology of Shakespeare's plays. This is actually produced by Stanley Wells, the famous editor, and this is a standard chronology. People don't agree about this list of Shakespeare's works, but you'll notice that where Falstaff is here, Merry Wives of Windsor, it says 1597 to 8. Stuck in between Henry IV Part 1, which we'll be featuring next February, and Henry IV Part 2, which we'll be featuring next April. Many experts put it there, thinking that he wrote it probably after Henry IV Part 1, maybe while he was writing Henry IV Part II or Henry V. Why? Because the same characters appear in this play. Very strangely, because he chooses to bring in people with the same names 200 years later. Henry IV was 200 years earlier. Suddenly here we have Falstaff, Mistress Quickly, and all the stars of the Henry IV plays transposed to Elizabethan England. So it's already very weird. Now why? Well, the story goes, and this is what is written here, it's to do with Queen Elizabeth. And John Dennis, in 1702, 100 years later, described the fact that maybe Queen Elizabeth asked Shakespeare to write a play. Now we imagine, let's imagine the scenario. Shakespeare's plays are very popular with Queen Elizabeth. She goes and sees them, and one day the order comes, presumably saying, Master Shakespeare, could you please write a play about Falstaff in love? To which Shakespeare says, yes, Your Majesty, yes. Can't refuse the royal command. And he goes back and says, what? Falstaff in love? That's impossible. Falstaff doesn't fall in love. Falstaff is a lustful guy, only interested in money. So why would he fall in love? However, presumably he went away and said, okay, well, all right, we'll use the same characters and we will set them in Windsor, because the Queen had also said on April the 23rd, 1597, something important is going to happen in Windsor. And this is question 2. What do garters have to do with this play? Women's garters, traditionally worn somewhere on their thigh. Well, this is the Order of the Garter, which is a very mysterious, the highest aristocratic rank you can be given in England. There are only 25 members. The Queen is the top, Prince Charles is number 2, and then there's this bunch of guys who wear very strange clothes. Now, they are invested in Windsor Castle every year, still, when they need new members, and they have a big feast. So we presume that she wanted an entertainment for that occasion, which happened to be on April the 23rd. Why? Because Lord Knudsen, who was her cousin and also a sponsor of Shakespeare's group, was becoming a member of the Order of the Garter. So this was a good reason. Now there's no proof this happened, but the editor of the Arden Shakespeare, with the wonderful name of Giorgio Melchiori, he came up with a very interesting idea, which was that maybe there was a performance of the Merry Wives of Windsor on that occasion. Then, in 1802, we had the quarto edition, which came out, the first printing, which actually doesn't mention the Garter stuff, but it's the first printing of the play, but it's only half the length of the folio, which came out in 1623 after Shakespeare's death. So his idea was, maybe Shakespeare wrote this entertainment, sticking in the Falstaff characters. Then he worked on a longer play, which was then cut short for touring around England, which they did, which would put the date maybe more later, 1598, 1599, 1600, and then the actual full, everything that was to do with this play was put into the folio, which is twice as long, including the bits mentioning the Garter, which are a little bit irrelevant to the story actually, and are cut mostly from the BBC production. The lines are cut. However, that was probably the origin of the play. Just an interesting trivial footnote. Did you know that a member of the Order of the Garter was Emperor Taisho? In fact, emperors Meiji, since Meiji, all 4 emperors have been members of the Order of the Garter. There he is in his costume. And they wear this very strange hat. That's a hat. Unfortunately, in this picture, we can't see his garter. They actually have a garter on their calf. There are nowadays some female members who are allowed to wear the garter on their arm so that people can see it. I don't have a picture of the current emperor, but he is also a member, and these such foreign members are described as stranger knights, which is a very nice term. Okay, so we have something to do with the order of the garter. So number 3 question is, why is the play set in Windsor? And what is the House of Windsor? Well, you probably all know a lot about Windsor. It's about 25 miles out of London on the Thames. It's still a pretty upmarket place, across the river from Eton School, as it has been for a long time. But Windsor has a tremendous history, going back to the 1,000 years really. What happened in Windsor is gradually it became a centre for the royal family and the court. So Windsor has always been closely associated with the royal family, and of course the current Queen's favourite place. She spends lots of weekends there, keeps saying she wants to spend more time in Windsor Castle. So it's a very important place for royalty. Now, at that time, in Shakespeare's time, it was a small market town, and it had been growing over the years as a centre of commerce. And so there were a lot of nouveau riche people. The middle class was gradually expanding towards the end of Elizabeth's reign. So we have the kind of people who appear in this play were there, probably more like kind of Surrey today, kind of financial people live. And of course the middle class were not too keen on the aristocracy. The aristocracy were gradually losing power and losing money a lot, up becoming the middle class, so there's a certain amount of friction there. The middle class, of course, disliked the aristocrats very much. And as the courtiers came to Windsor Castle, apparently in Shakespeare's time it was very common for them to try and seduce the wives of Windsor, chasing the girls in Windsor. So this plot actually is something to do with reality. In this play, of course, it doesn't work. It is a total failure, this attempt to seduce women. But that went on, apparently. And so when Shakespeare decided to write this play, presumably he thought, well, okay, let's make it up to date. Let's stick in a lot of modern slang, modern expressions, put it all, see what Falstaff does in Elizabethan times. And there were various plays already about jealous husbands and courtiers chasing after the women and so on, already in existence. So he used that idea, and he also used one or two bits of Italian stories and so on, but it's mostly original. So he cobbled together this play, and Windsor was the set. Now, as a bit of trivia, the House of Windsor, do you know why the current royal family is called the House of Windsor? I don't know whether you know or not. Actually, strictly speaking, it is now the House of Windsor Mountbatten. That's to do with Prince Philip. One of his many names was Mountbatten, and when he married Queen Elizabeth, in theory, his name should have been the family name, right? The husband's name. But Queen Elizabeth refused. There was a lot of trouble about that. She insisted on continuing with the House of Windsor, and it was changed some years ago, slightly. Prince Philip felt a bit left out. So Prince Charles, for example, he is full of German, Russian, Greek, whatever, European blood. Not much English blood. Princess Diana had far more English blue blood than he did. However, that family is now basically the House of Windsor, and that is since 1917, in the middle of the First World War, it was decided that the name of the family at that time, which was the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, thanks to Queen Victoria's husband, Albert. This was not a good name because the Germans were making, I think, some kind of planes or bombs called Gotha. So they said, let's change our name. And naturally they changed the name to Windsor. And here is the House of Windsor coat of arms, which of course includes Windsor Castle with a nice crown on it. This is their current coat of arms. And there's this lovely quote I put in from Emperor Wilhelm II. Remember, these are all connected, these families. This is in the middle of the First World War. When he heard this news, he said, and it's here, he said, "Oh, I plan to see the Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg Gotha." It's a kind of nice joke. Anyway, so he himself referred to the play. Okay, now number 4. Here's a general knowledge question. What's the difference between a quarto and a folio? You may know this, I don't know. But here we have this is the quarto edition, the first printing, the cover page in 1602. It's extremely difficult to read because Elizabethan printers were very rough, as you can see. Their spelling was a bit odd. I don't know whether you can read that. Shall I read it to you? This is the title of the play. Can you see Merry Wives of Windsor? Difficult to find. It says, "A most pleasant and excellent conceited comedy of Sir John Falstaff and the Merry Wives of Windsor," in small print. "Intermixed with sundry variable and pleasing humours of Sir Hugh the Welsh knight, Justice Shallow and his wise," that's not wife, it's wise, cousin Master Slender, with the swaggering vein of ancient pistol and corporal Nym, by William Shakespeare, as it hath been divers times acted by the right honourable my Lord Chamberlain's servants, both before her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, and elsewhere. Printed by blah, 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 blah. So, it wasn't called the Merry Wives of Windsor. However, when we get to the folio in 1623, and this is the first page of that, there it is, quite clearly the Merry Wives of Windsor. So his friends decided to simplify things. And the difference between a folio and a quarto, this is on the bottom of the page too, just for your interest, here is how they did them. These two on the right are a quarto. It's for printing a book, so you had a piece of paper which was folded twice. Folded twice so that you had 8 pages. And the printing was done according to these numbers, like that. This is the front, this is the back, okay? And the size of a quarto was about the same as this book, about this size, a little bit wider. So fairly, Elizabethan paperback, okay? The folio, however, was much bigger. The folio was just folded twice, like this. This is it. This was one folio leaf. And what they did is, they used the word gather. They would gather 3 leaves like this together for binding. So if you see the numbering here, it goes like that, the page numbers. So when it's bound, it comes out like that. And actually this is more or less exactly the size of a folio. Roughly B4. So you can imagine the folio of 1620 was quite a big book. They had about 450 leaves, so it was very heavy and very expensive, but the size meant they could have 2 columns. So that's a mark of the folio. It's all written in 2 columns like that. Okay, so that's the difference between a quarto and a folio. And what's the next question? Yes, number 5. Why do actors, audiences and foreigners love the play, but many academics and critics don't? For 300 years, this has been a very popular play. It's been performed a lot. It's still performed a lot, not only in Britain but around the world. Because there's lots of action, there's lots of interesting things going on, and it's very funny. And people say that audiences love it because it's great entertainment. And we have to remember, as Samuel Johnson always pointed out, Shakespeare was writing for actors of his time on the stage. He was not writing for university professors in the 21st century. So whatever they say, he was the playwright, and he had a group of actors, and he wrote for them, and sometimes wrote for the Queen, Your Majesty, right? So he had to be careful what he was writing, but he had to fit the situation and please the audience. Actors and actresses love the play because there's such good characters. Most of them are very interesting. There are very few uninteresting characters in this play. So actors and actresses have a great time performing it. And as people say, many foreigners like it because it's full of typical British humour. And it has many different elements that please people. Critics and academics tend not to like it because they say, oh, it's a bit silly, you know, oh, it's a rather weak play, and Falstaff is nothing like, you know, he is in the Henry IV plays. Mistress Quickly is very funny, okay, but she's not as strong as she is. They compare with the Henry IV plays and say, you know, it's kind of not very interesting. Cheap Shakespeare, they think. I don't think that's very fair, really, to say that, but they think that. And so you will find, and here I included a few comments, people are not very complimentary about this play. However, I think it's full of interest in many ways. Okay, the next one, question 6, what's special about the language of the play? You can probably guess, 87.8% means prose, not verse. This is one reason why people think it was written in a hurry in 2 weeks. Because prose is easier to write. You don't have to think about the verse so much. Knock it off. More like conversation. And it also meant that Shakespeare could put in lots of Elizabethan conversation. The only verse is really at the end when they have a kind of formal announcements, and Fenton, the aristocratic young guy in love with Anne Page, who does speak verse, and very occasionally Falstaff slips into verse, but it's basically prose. Okay, the next question.